While the DOJ, the Department of Justice, in literally the last maybe 8 to 10 minutes here, is dropping a new indictment, charging Hamas leaders federally for their role in the October 7th attacks. Of course, there's questions of what kind of impact that'll actually have. We've got our teams covering all of it. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell posted up near the White House. But I want to start with Raf Sanchez, who's live for us in Tel Aviv. And can you help us understand, Raf, what an indictment by the American Justice Department against Hamas leaders could actually practically, functionally do on the ground?
It's a really good question, Hallie. As you mentioned, this indictment dropped just in the last 10 minutes or so our teams are still working through it. But I can tell you what jumped out at me just looking at the first page of it. The very first name on that indictment is Ismail Haniyeh. He was the political leader of Hamas. And I say he was, Hallie, because he was assassinated by Israel in Iran a couple of months ago. So that gives you some sense of what this indictment means in real terms. The first person on it is dead already. The second person on it is Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He is the ultimate decision maker on Hamas's side in this conflict. He is in a tunnel somewhere underneath Gaza. Israel's most elite commandos, all of its intelligence assets, everything it has to bring to bear is searching for this man. He is Israel's #1 most wanted. And so the fact that he is on an American federal indictment, frankly, is unlikely to make much difference one way or another to this all-out Israeli hunt to find Sinwar dead or alive. Now, it may be that there are details in this indictment that shed new light on the treatment, the torture, the killing of Americans on October 7th and since then. But I think functionally it is unlikely that this means very much for the men who have been indicted.
So let me ask you about the reality on the ground there where you are in Tel Aviv. It is now after midnight in Israel, night number 3 of those huge demonstrations. The protesters are showing no indication that they're going to move on. Is there any indication that the prime minister will move politically, or does it just seem like status quo on that front?
You know, Hallie, you and I have talked about this. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a stubborn, defiant leader, and nothing we have seen today indicates that he is planning to back down. We were on the streets a little earlier. The scene you're looking at was outside the Israeli Defense Ministry. It's less than a mile from here. And we spoke to a lot of those protesters who you're seeing, and we heard heartbreak, we heard anger, but we heard deep, deep frustration that they do not think that Netanyahu is listening. We spoke to one woman whose cousin is being held hostage in Gaza, and she told us it is just unbelievable that 11 months into this, the Israeli people are having to plead with their government to bring the hostages home. So there is no indication at this point that Netanyahu is backing down from his key demand, which is keeping Israeli troops on the Egypt-Gaza border, that critical area known as the Philadelphia corridor. Hallie.
Talk more about that corridor, the Philadelphia corridor, what it means and why it is so strategically important.
So it's about 9 miles wide. It runs along the Egypt-Gaza border. You can see it on your screen there. And Israel says that the many, many weapons that Hamas has used, both on October 7th and over the course of the war since, were smuggled in tunnels underneath that corridor. So Israel says it is absolutely critical that its forces remain there to prevent Hamas from rearming. Hamas is saying there is not going to be a deal if Israeli troops remain on that corridor. And it isn't just Hamas. Egypt, who is one of the key mediators in this process, a key American partner, is saying that Netanyahu is blowing up the chances of a ceasefire deal by insisting on keeping Israeli troops there. The U.S. is saying at this point everybody needs to show more flexibility, but it is just not clear how you get through this zero-sum situation of Israel saying they're staying on that corridor and Hamas saying they need to go. Hallie.
Raf Sanchez, live for us tonight in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you. Kelly, I want to bring you in now to the conversation here. And can we go back to that indictment here again? I know it's just dropped. Our teams are still going through it. Is it more of a symbolic document or a pragmatic one?
Well, it certainly has a symbolic component because using the levers of U.S. government power to make a criminal argument against leaders of Hamas for, in part, conspiring to kill U.S. citizens is symbolic in some ways, but it is a tool. It is a tool to say the U.S. government is seeking to hold them accountable and also to drive the message to the families that are involved, to the allies in Israel, that the U.S. takes this seriously and that these actions will provoke a response from the U.S. government. So you can call it in some ways symbolic, but the pragmatism of it is to show that the government will respond. We understand it's about 38 to 40 pages. There are numerous counts, and we'll learn more about the particulars, but also for some of the specific individuals who were named in the indictment, and Raf talked about that a bit. Part of what the criminal liability does is if there is ever a point down the line where they have another chapter of life or leadership or what have you, it can curtail their travel, their ability to engage with others around the world in the realm of sanctions and just the international norms. Hamas, of course, is a terrorist organization. It has a political component, and it leads politically within Gaza. And so having this U.S. indictment may incite some to believe that this is the U.S. against Hamas, and it may also be a way of pointing out support for Israel indirectly by taking this action. Hallie?
So, Kelly, we talked about the sort of take it or leave it ceasefire push that the Biden administration is trying to make. When we talk about the Biden administration, we meet, of course, the president, but also, interestingly, the vice president, because she now seems to be taking on a more muscular role on foreign policy, at least more muscular than, for example, in the first couple years of the administration. Fair read? Talk to us about her role in this.
Well, she has to have a more front and center role. As a sitting vice president, not the candidate, the role is to support the president's vision. And now as the candidate and certainly the White House is giving her room in ways we had not seen before to put into words her own views on some of this. Although there's not really any daylight between Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden on these matters, she is able to have more of a voice in this. And that is both necessary and notable, because as a candidate, she will have to articulate her own policy, her own vision should she win in November, and what goes forward from that, and also to continue to work in support of the president. And on issues as big and as complex as this, perhaps more hands on deck can arguably be helpful. It can also mean there will be areas where any slight change in wording or tone or emphasis can draw people to scrutinize. Is there any break from the Biden agenda? Is there any break from Biden policy? And we don't see that broadly, but we certainly know that Kamala Harris recognizes in an electoral sense and in a leadership sense, she has to be talking about these issues.
Kelly O'Donnell live for us outside the White House tonight. A lot of developments in the last little bit. Kelly, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.